Okay, our next presentation is from both Mike and Allison, and they're discussing animal cruelty, neglect, both, or neither. Welcome back to Mike and Allison.
All right, folks, we are talking about animal hoarding. And the first thing that comes to mind is bias, obviously. We all have a picture in our mind of what animal hoarding is, and the people that are doing the actual hoarding. We're going to challenge you a little bit, I hope, into reconsidering what these people are, what they look like, who they are, and why they're hoarding. You know both of us. So what is animal hoarding? It's defined as when, and a lot of this information, so you know, we'll have the sources down below, so you know where we got it from. I'm sure I didn't have to tell you that, but I feel obligated to tell you that. When someone accumulates a large number of animals. What if somebody has 20 animals that they're feeding, caring for, loving? They have, large, vast land, and they're all, is that still hoarding? Think about it. Fails to provide minimum standards of nutrition, sanitation, veterinary care. Fails to act when animals or environment begins to deteriorate. And we'll talk a little bit here about hoarders, and they don't start out in bad situations. Fails to recognize the negative impact of their own health. And then the paralysis of analysis, and their behavior leads to social isolation. This is what the public thinks animal hoarding is. And if you're interested and you want a crazy cat litter lady action figure, they are on sale on Australian Amazon for $44. Okay? The crazy cat lady board game is also on sale for $49. So if you know one of these people who would enjoy one of these, do it. Okay? I wish I would have thought ahead of time. I would have bought one and brought it with here to hand out. But this is what the public thinks about. Because why? Bias. Their perception is mostly cats, because we always hear about the 150 cats coming from the crazy old lady's house. So according to Dr. Gary Petronik, in his public health report, this is in Florida, we don't have as many public health reports as we should on this matter. So you'll see some of these are dated. 49 involving 49 animal hoarding cases, 77% were heavily cluttered and unsanitary. Makes sense, right? Fits what we assume. 69% had accumulations of animal urine, feces in human living areas. 59% contained dead animals. 26% had animals and human feces on the hoarder's bed. 32% lacked a working bathroom. Are we getting a picture of where these are? Are these typically, and we're judgmental here, typically in our affluent areas? Typically not. Lacked working cooking facilities. Has no working refrigerator. Had no working heat. Does it sound like a place that animals should be living in? What about people? Let's remember that there are two sides to this. There's the human and the animal side. This is what we walk into. Haven't used the laser pointer yet. This is what we walk into. It's an environment that is created, it presents hazard. Accumulation of animal excrement, it's hazardous. The fumes can destroy the cilia in your lungs. How does it impact other agencies? Well, we all understand the animal control side and the animal management side. What do they do with the animals when they're in their care? I assume several of y'all have dealt with hoarding cases, large animal hoarding cases. Most of our facilities, where are they at? They're built for capacity from 25 years ago. They're by the sewer, in the lowlands. They're not meant to take on an extra 150 animals. But no matter whether the agency is government or privately operated, shelters, they just struggle to find the space for them. And even if space is found, the costs associated can be enormous. We all have budgets that we work within. Those budgets are typically set out at the beginning of the year. And we're 9 months into it and we take in 150 animals. Does your budget allow for that? A lot of places it won't. You also have to treat for the illnesses, disease. And then from the animal management side of it, for the officer's side, a lot of times they're considered evidence. I'm not sure exactly how the judicial system works here in Australia, but I can tell you a hoarding case in America can take up to 2 years to go to court. That's 2 years worth of expenses you have to put out. And at the end, the courts may give them all back and say they don't owe you any restitution. So if this is a prosecutable case, and we're going to talk prosecutable cases here because we also have to understand that prosecution, when you walk into this, and we'll talk more about it here in a little bit, when you walk into a hoarding situation, prosecution should be the last thing on your mind. It is not the first thing you go to. The first thing, you look at animal health and human health, and then you find out the whys. So if it comes to prosecution, it can take forever. Work on your voluntary surrender at that time. And that allows you with so much more that you can do. And then there's also the treating them as evidence. We won't get into big conversations about treating them as evidence, but evidence has a certain way it has to be treated. So you do have to take that into account. We've learned that classic approaches to animal hoarding are ineffective. We've dealt with hoarding situations for many years in America, and I'm sure you have just as long here. The classic approaches of go in, take the animals, throw somebody in jail, write them citations, but it doesn't work. Or go in there and take all the animals out and have them sign them over to you and leave the human the way they were. Doesn't work. So we have to think about it. Sometimes we've ignored the problem, correct? Do you normally see these situations from the front door? When you're driving by, do you normally see the 150 cats? Do you see the 300 dogs? Sometimes you don't. My previous life, I was an insurance agent for 15 years. I would inspect a house. Beautiful house from the outside. Go around to the backyard. The swimming pool's full of trash, and you can't walk through the backyard. People put up a front. We wait until the problem becomes a crime before we get involved. Should we wait for it to become a crime? Should we offer assistance as soon as possible? We allow the hoarder to merely surrender the animals to avoid prosecution. And we'll talk a little bit about why that's not such a good idea. We place all the responsibility for the case into the hands of animal control or animal management. Just a show of hands for any of you animal management any of y'all go through social work school? Any of y'all psychiatrists, psychologists? Any of y'all understand the full mental health? And if you are, I applaud you and your agency. But typically, we're hired for our enforcement capabilities, not for our mental health evaluation side. And we address the initial problem without follow-up visits. So what we want to do is interrupt the cycle of abuse. Newly acquired animal, condition deteriorates, somebody makes a report to us because we're reactive by nature. Any of y'all going door to door just to check on people's animals every day in your city? You got that much time? Okay, I didn't think so. So we're reactive. We only go out if somebody files a report. And then the way it typically goes is the report's made, an arrest is made, or citations are given. We seize the animals, and then what happens? They get a new animal, and it starts down this whole road again. I didn't realize I had so many slides up front. Animal hoarding is a crime in many cases. I will tell you these slides are from the National Animal Control Association. This is what they teach their animal control officers. And through part of my guidance and work, we are redoing these slides because this is a false statement. Animal hoarding is not a crime in all instances. And I refuse to sit up here and let that statement stand. So the crime in many jurisdictions is not specified to hoarding, but rather the neglect, pain, suffering that's inflicted on the animal. So a lot of times when we go into these cases, we go in and there is no actual hoarding crime because jurisdictions don't have a law against hoarding. They may have a limit on animal law, like we do, of 4 animals. But it's the neglect, the pain and suffering, cruelty that may come out of it. Very situation specific and hinges upon the ability to articulate the impact on the animal. Do we have any, I know we have lots of vets in here, but do we have any animal management officers in here that are also vets? Congratulations to your agency. As 14 years, almost 15 years in doing this, I can't stand on a stand in front of a judge and a prosecutor and tell them the health and condition of the animal. I am not a veterinarian. I'm not. And if I was on the defense attorney side, which my next career, that's where I'll go, just so I can win all the cases against all the people who don't care to learn, I would simply ask that question. What training have you had? 14 years of this is not equivalent to the degree of a veterinarian. So just be aware of that. And depending on the type of hoarder, criminal intervention may be considered. Should is never a word you should use. May be considered alongside non-criminal intervention. And I easily could have changed these slides before I got here. I purposely did not because this is what most animal control and animal management is being taught, is the shalls and the mays and the shoulds and is criminal. So I want to point out what a lot of folks are being taught in our country and possibly yours, is that hoarding is a crime, and that's the end of it, but it is not. Some jurisdictions in our country have hoarding specifically referenced, Hawaii and Illinois. That in itself is problematic. So if your councils or anything have that verbiage where hoarding is illegal, then I challenge you to define hoarding in such a way as it doesn't affect those mentally who deal with mental issues. and there is no intent to injure. I'll let you do that.
Oh, sure. I guess here. I think this is on, right? Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike. Just out of curiosity, how many folks have dealt with animal hoarding cases, just by a show of hands? Ah, a number of you. Okay, excellent. So you know what this is like. Just to give you a little bit about my background, I've never been an animal management officer. However, I have worked alongside, and I managed animal management officers over a 5-year period. But also, at the start of my career at the ASPCA, we had a humane law enforcement department, and we were experiencing this of really going up against a wall when we were dealing with animal hoarding cases. And so they actually put together an intervention or a prevention team, and I managed that team. I partnered with a social worker, and over the period of a couple of years, we probably visited about 300 animal hoarding cases. That was my job for several years. I have a soft spot for people who have animal hoarding behavior, the complexities of it, a lot of the times the human component as well. But I will talk about interventions that might work, but for me, it was really crucial to partner with a social worker and somebody who could really handle the human component, and I could then focus on the animal side. So for those who don't know or may be familiar, we're just going to go through the different types of animal hoarders. And I do like to say, I just want to say here, I think moving towards people first language of saying people with hoarding behavior or hoarding tendencies rather than labeling someone as an animal hoarder, because we're all more than just one thing. And this is a mental health disorder. It's classified, I don't know if you use it here as well, in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Standard Manual. It's the 5th edition. Hoarding disorder is labeled there. It doesn't specifically say animals, but at least the hoarding disorder is labeled as a mental health issue. Okay, so there's 3 types of animal hoarders or animal hoarding behavior. There's the overwhelmed caregiver, there's the rescue hoarding, and then there's the exploiter hoarder. And so we'll talk about each of those. An overwhelmed caregiver, I think there hasn't been a lot of updates to this language, but this, I feel, is the finest line, really, because who's to say what an overwhelmed caregiver is versus someone who is actually exhibiting hoarding disorder or hoarding behavior? I think it can be a very fine line. It's folks who may have some awareness, have just gotten really out of sorts. Maybe they haven't had desexing options available and things have quickly escalated. But I think the difference is that usually there was some kind of traumatic event or triggering event that preceded the hoarding behavior. And I would have to say, of the overwhelmed caregivers that I interacted with, I would see this. It was, my son passed away, or I lost my job. And obviously that happens to many people, but that in combination with maybe some kind of pre-existing either OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, or maybe some kind of attachment disorder, that combination of things really might trigger the actual behavior of, because some of us might say, oh, I got overwhelmed, I then reach out for help, or I'm then able to access help, and it doesn't turn into something like this, which is one of the cases I saw in New York City. And this was a pair of sisters who were living together in the Bronx section of New York City. And they started out with 2, I think you call them Dachshunds here. And by the time we were called to intervene, there were 54 of them in their home. And I would classify this as an overwhelmed caregiver because it's almost like they were in a fog. They really didn't know how they got into this place. They were very overwhelmed. This is something that I think we also see with animal hoarding situations. They didn't really know how many animals that they had. I think they thought, or they said they had about 40. It ended up being 54. They had names for some of them. They definitely were very attached to some of the original ones and just really felt like things had gotten out of hand. They were also very embarrassed. And there was neglect that was happening to themselves as well. And you can see there on the bottom left of the picture, they were trying to separate some of them. They were keeping some of the puppies in crates, and it just was not a great situation at all. We'll talk a little bit more later about the intervention that we used. But in this situation, technically, yes, we could have brought cruelty charges for the condition that some of the puppies were in, and one of the adults. However, who was that going to help in that situation? So what we really looked at was how can we, first and foremost, stop this situation from continuing, and how can we connect them to other resources so that they could also get the help that they needed. And I will say one thing about demographics too, which I think is important. I know there's like the board game, and there's, I think I've actually purchased the Crazy Cat Lady figurine, but I think it's important to not get stuck on stereotypes. These two women right here, they were actually both of Puerto Rican descent. They mostly spoke Spanish. They said that they really loved their animals. So it really can be, and I think actually both of them were employed. So yeah, we just can't make assumptions from the outside of what people might be struggling with. In my estimation, in my experience, it's been easier to interact with overwhelmed caregivers. They generally want the help or will accept it, and there's solutions that you can come up with. I struggle between thinking which one's more challenging to deal with, a rescue hoarding situation or an exploiting hoarder situation. They're both very, very challenging. What I will say is in my roles working in animal sheltering and animal management, we're seeing more and more of the rescue hoarding situation. And this is definitely when there's an association of identity with the act of accumulating or acquiring animals, and really avoids authorities. You can do I don't know if it happens here, but in the US, you can Google rescue groups gone wrong or rescue group hoarding, and you'll see there was one just recently, I think in either Arizona or New Mexico, where I think the person had more, and it was a legitimate public charity, but they had more than 116 dogs, and they had taken them from shelters, seemingly to rescue them, and had been housing them in really horrible conditions. And there's something here, I think the distinction too is that there really is a mental health component where there's like a switch that flips. And it's also this idea of just continuously acquiring and needing to acquire more. These are very, very challenging to deal with. I know we have some photos here, and yes, a network of enablers. And I think really us as animal management and animal shelter, we can be complicit in that, right? We want to find homes for the animals in our care, and it can be very challenging and difficult when we are crowded. And so we reach out to groups, right? And I don't know if you've all been, I know I've been guilty of this, is of just saying, okay, great, I'm busy. This group said they will take the animals, and not really maybe keying in on, oh, how many animals has that group taken this week? Or how many have they taken this year? This is definitely something in Los Angeles that we all of a sudden saw, oh, this one cat group has taken 1,600 cats this year. And there's really no way that they are able to care for that many cats with the staff that they have and the resources they have. So I think it's important for us to be vigilant on that as well. We have some photos here. This is not from the one I'm going to talk about, but large-scale cases that I was involved with the ASPCA, where we did involve law enforcement, and we had to get warrants. You can Google Caboodle Ranch, which is one from Florida. There was over 700 cats. I was part of the team that removed those cats. It was a sanctuary that, and I can tell you also, I'm not sure that it was the best avenue. The cruelty, because this man seemed very, very ill to me. I had the chance to meet and interact with him. But anyway, that's for a different discussion, but we did need to get involved with law enforcement there. You can also look up Tiger Ranch, which was in Pennsylvania, which another group. Those cats were very, very ill. But those were legitimate public charities that really tipped over into a hoarding situation. And these are some more photos from that. Did you have it?
Well, you can also Google Humane Society of the Delta. They have lots of photos on that one. That was one from 2 years ago that I was called in as a consult for the local county prosecutor. 383 animals, 383 dogs, 106 cats. The majority of them lived outside in 10 by 10 pens with ditches dug between them where the raw sewage was pushed off in the ditch, and so it just floated because we're wet in Arkansas, nothing drains. Deceased dogs, deceased cats. There was a mobile home or trailer on the property where the person lived in with her daughter and her 3-year-old grandson. He had bite marks all over the grandson from the rats. There was also dead rats in most of the kennels where the dogs killed them at night. At night, when you would go out there right before the sunset while we were there, it would look like an ocean wave across the ground, and that was the tens of thousands of rats jumping in one hole and out the other. In my years, it was the worst situation I had ever seen. We had some Department of Health issues on that one. The State Department of Health didn't want to work close enough with us. So unfortunately, we charged her with over 400 counts of animal cruelty, which is a felony in the state of Arkansas. What we were able, with my consultation with the prosecutor and her attorney, we were able to work out, since Department of Health was no help whatsoever in it, that she would plea to a 1 year of mental health evaluations and treatment with a reevaluation at the end of that year on whether charges would be filed or would continue to be filed. So she was just overwhelmed. She had we all know the starfish. I threw it back, can't save them all, I can save just one more. This was her. She thought that she was the only one that could save these animals. And barriers, she didn't adopt anything out. And this was right on the roadside. Everybody saw these animals every day, but she wouldn't adopt any of them out. So she truly had a mental disorder that there was nobody else that could help them but her. So she didn't see what she was doing wrong. So from my opinion, her intent was good. Her intentions were to save the animals. She just couldn't get past the fact that other folks could help. So anyway.
Thanks. There's a couple more photos. All right. And then the exploiting hoarding, which is also extremely challenging to interact with if anyone has. Oh, there we go. Yes, and usually some type of law enforcement or criminal prosecution is necessary because there really is, I think even working very closely with social workers, you really just tend to spin your wheels a lot. Even if you get other agencies involved, it's been extremely challenging. I'll just go over, and usually there's some other kind of disorder that might be there as well, a personality disorder. Sorry, I'm just gonna skip ahead. I'll come back to that, Mike. I'll just talk about these two cases that I was involved with. On the left-hand side, I remember, even though she was so challenging to deal with, this was a situation where we got code enforcement involved, buildings. We got Department of Aging because she was an elder person, and she had, I believe, it was about 30 cats and maybe 7 dogs, but the conditions were horrendous. The buildings department came in and actually condemned the building and sealed the building off. She was not going to leave for any reason. She was removed and taken to hospital, but she actually ended up leaving, escaping, and this woman, I think, was in her 70s, and breaking back in the building to live there again. She really did not want to leave. So it was extremely, extremely challenging. She knew her rights. She had a network of people also who were enabling her. So very challenging to deal with. It took a long time and a lot of resources as well. On the right-hand side, this is one that I actually, Mike, I heard you talk about Ginger before, and this is maybe not at the same level, but it's something on the human side that I tremendously regret of how we handled it, and I understand we were doing the best that we could at the time. This was a woman who was living with her adult son in a trailer in an RV on the streets of Brooklyn, and had 40 cats, and was living in those conditions. We partnered with the local council, with elected officials, with traffic and enforcement. We had tried to offer services to her. She refused them. We even examined the cats. I really wish we had handled it differently, but the approach that we decided to take was she had traffic violations. So we said we were going to tow the vehicle, but her option was that she could surrender the cats, and then there was actually housing lined up for her and her adult son, guaranteed. What we didn't account for was that she was not interested in that. And that was our plan and didn't really involve her. And so she refused the housing. She did end up surrendering the cats, so I guess it was better for the cats. But she and her son decided to live on the street, and they actually lived in the area that I lived in. And so I would see them regularly living on the street. So I share that also to say that this, I heard about, like not great or imperfect solutions. I do believe we were doing the best we could at the time. And I think there's opportunity to do better and to learn more, and maybe even pausing longer to come up with a different solution could have been better ultimately for her and her son. And I don't know, I actually saw her carrying around a cat carrier, so I think she started acquiring again. And I know that's something that Mike is going to talk about as well, is just the 100% recidivism rate. Do you want to mention anything about that?
Are you done with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So we've learned here that it's not an easy fix. It's not an arrest and forget. It's not a get your health department involved. What I learned was we have to have all these contacts now before we get out in the field and need them. So intervention and hoarder type, you'll see this is 2006 is where this comes from. Well, I've got a child that was born shortly before 2006, so it's been a long time ago. But this gives you the general approach and the outcome, and they're fairly, it's fairly up to date. Obviously, they could be more up to date, involving more mental health, involving more avenues for human success, because all these are really focused on is animal success, and we need to work on the human success as well. But overwhelmed, I've talked a lot, and a lot of other folks talked a lot about the community and our ability to talk to the community. Well, it doesn't matter whether it's caregiver, whether it's a rescue hoarder, or whether it's an exploiter. We always start by talking. Okay? Always, that's where you start. Unfortunately, my officers in the past, and some officers, and me as well, in the past, we hear hoarding, we hear 383 dogs, and we're driving 2.5 hours to assist, thinking that we're going to go in there and take all the animals, put somebody in jail, and we're going to do cruelty charges. When really we should be thinking about, let's go over there, let's evaluate the animals where they are, see if they can be assisted where they're at, talk to the person involved, see what help we can give them, and then move on to the next step if talking doesn't work. But there's no reason we can't have a conversation in today's society. So if you can't persuade with verbal arguments, then there's the possibility of future legal action, right? I will tell you, the rescue hoarder, the explorer hoarder, they're tough. They have it in their mind. The rescue hoarder has it in their mind that they are doing the right thing, and nobody's going to tell them any different. Why? Because they're the ones that pick these animals up. They're the ones that's been caring for these animals. Are they caring for them up to our standards? No. Are they caring for them up to legal standards? Many times not. But in their mind, they are. And you can't tell them any different. So, it says here on the rescue hoarder, you can motivate them possibly with rescue efforts, bringing people in to take animals away, help her get back down to normal. I will tell you, in the case that I went over on, this case was, I think, June or July. In February, a national organization came in and took all 203 dogs she had and placed them somewhere else. So within that 4-month period, she restocked, plus some. Okay? So be aware that just downscaling and letting them go without providing any assistance mentally, emotionally, is not going to help, because the mentality is still there, the issue they have is still there, and we haven't addressed it. So you may have to go further with prosecution. Explorer hoarders, that from this research is about the only way you can do it as prosecution, but we don't start there. That is the last step when all else fails. As you can tell, this is 2009. This is still based on 5 freedoms, right? It's hard. I looked. I couldn't find anything updated. So once again, that tells me 2 things. We should throw this slide away. And second of all, it shows that we need groups to do more research and update their research. It doesn't say throw away all the old research, but update research. So any of you university people out there who would like a research project, this would be a good one. But I think we could probably, just because we're all educated folks in the manner of animal welfare, I think we could replace the 5 freedoms up here and pretty much follow the same scale. And you look at competent caregiving, always has a high quality of life, right? And we could follow that same scale. So this wouldn't take much interpretation to make it fit today's world. So we're going to let Allison talk about what does work now.
Thanks. Just see what's up there. Yeah. Yeah. So I guess the short answer, what I'll say here is I believe strongly in harm reduction, and that's the approach that we've taken in a lot of instances. Yes. We talked about the 100% recidivism rate. I'm sure you've all seen that as well. And that these are so challenging to work with. The interdisciplinary approach, don't try to do these alone. Department of Health, they may or may not be interested, thank you, in working with you, but you still have to try. And I think also lessening the benign nature of this, because it can be, it's like, oh, well, they're just taking in animals, they're trying to help, and people might be bringing animals to them. So getting assistance in talking about how dangerous this is for the human and the animal involved, and what a barrier to services it can be, and how it's connected to elder abuse. Also have seen a lot of cases where the elder adult doesn't want to be in this situation and someone else is keeping them in there. So just seeing what different avenues you can take to approach these cases. And the multi-agency approach. And I think the way to sell it too is that you're going to end up here no matter what. And it just depends at what point, because it won't go away on its own. Folks will get more animals or they'll continue breeding. So the earlier that you get in there and deal with this, the better, for sure. And I just wanted to share also some of the approaches that we used. As I said, the harm reduction, we very rarely in our cases would remove all the animals. We would go in, we would do an assessment, we would have the social worker come in and see what we could refer to. In some instances, it would be guardianship, which is a difficult legal process, but just explored all options. And we did a lot of desexing. You can see in both these photos, we brought in vet techs and veterinarians. On the left-hand side, we were trapping all the cats to get them desexed. And I think all but 2 were coming back. And that can be a challenging thing to sell to people as well, is why people who lived in the building, how on earth are you bringing these cats back? We just didn't have an alternative. We couldn't take all these cats in at the same time, and it wasn't going to solve the issue. And we actually saw in a lot of instances that people were able to start improving their living conditions and starting to get the help that they needed. And then on the right-hand side, once again, bringing the services to the home and partnering with social services to get them the assistance that they needed. Anything, Mike, you're going to talk about? I'll just make this one plug. I think especially on the rescue hoarding piece, this is why this summit is so important. We play a part in this as well. If there's this idea that there's a perfect home or the ideal adopter, that has gotten socialized and people really gleamed onto that. And so this idea that they're better off with a certain type of person can really permeate and I think set us up for more rescue hoarding situations. Oh, sorry.
So what does this mean for animal shelters? Thank you. Got 2 minutes here to talk about everything you need to do. So what does it mean for animal shelters? It means we have to remove the barriers. And I'm not blaming animal sheltering, but a lot of the reasons why we have so many rescues and why rescues get so overwhelmed is because we have barriers to adoption. We have barriers to returning home. We have biases against who we'll adopt to. We judge people. So once again, I'm not blaming sheltering, but sheltering, rescuing, we all have our part to play in this. And for us as sheltering side of things, if we remove those adoptions to barriers, if we return more animals home, that allows more space in our kennels and reduces the demand on rescues. And so that is the part that the sheltering side can play in this. And adopt out in all communities. I see a lot, once again, that's that bias to where, oh, well, you're from this town, you can't have one of our animals. Or, you live in this neighborhood, you can't have one of our animals. So if we remove those barriers, we return more animals home. The thought and the feeling that rescues feel like there is no choice but to take animals. Maybe we'll lessen that burden on them just a little bit. So. Oh, that's it. Yep, that's it.
Yes, please. Thank you both so much. And I'll invite Jessica and Brooke and Jim. I'm not sure if Jim's still here. Can't see him, but if you can both come up and we'll address some questions. And we have some winners that will need to go to the registration office for the most upvoted questions. We've got Angie Harriet, Joanne Amos, Dee Walton, and Elizabeth Ferrand. So if you can go to the office and collect your prize for the most upvoted questions. Okay, first question is for Jessica from Dee and Joanne. How do you break down barriers when the mistrust is all they know? How can you get the best out of those situations where you offer the tools to assist, but it is met with resistance?
So that's a huge question, obviously, and it's something that we can do days of training on. The first place I'd say is pretty obviously, you need to rebuild that trust. You need to become someone that they go to for help and support. You need to become a trusted advisor as opposed to an authority figure. So some, off the top of my head, some really quick tools. If you want to write down motivational interviewing as a tool for your officers to all understand how to do a conversation with a person that is about what do you need and how can I be a partner with you in delivering that for you, as opposed to I'm the expert coming in telling you what you need to do. So really changing the conversations that we have with people away from here's the answer you must do to here's some issue that we think we have. What do you think about it? Is it actually an issue or is it a perceived issue on our part? And how are we as partners going to move towards that? Now that can take, depending, if you're dealing with a community of people who has an innate and instilled for good reason distrust of authority figures, that can take years. But you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to start with people who want to do it. You have to have the right team who are interested in these conversations, and you have to have a strategy for how you're going to do it and not undermine yourself with every second conversation. So, sorry, I don't know if that
Jessica.
really answered it, but there's lots of strategies. Welcome to grab me afterwards and I can send you some ideas.
Thank you. A question for Brooke from Elizabeth. Have you had experience using infrared drones for cat locating? If there is access, do you believe it could be a more effective source of evidence?
Yep. Great question. I have actually very recently obtained my remote pilot aircraft license for research, so it is a possibility. I'm learning currently working with koalas because they do hide very well up in the trees, which I think is, I guess, easier when they are out in national park areas. Not sure how it would work in residential areas, particularly with privacy. Using drones, there are quite a lot of rules about where you can fly. But yeah, definitely a possibility for maybe free roaming, like in national parks rather than in residential areas. Might be doable.
Thanks, Brooke. Yeah. And one last quick question for Allison and Mike from B. Are there specific warning signs that can help identify a cat hoarder, especially at time of adoption? And what kind of educational resources could we provide to them?
He said, wow. Well, I want to say first that it's not just cats, right? But I think that can definitely play a component. I do think, I don't know if you'll agree with this, Mike, but I think sometimes, well, first of all, I don't know necessarily that they would come in to adopt. If it's a single person, they might. Sometimes there's an odor. But I actually don't think that there's a lot. I'm thinking of some of our cases. A person was a flight attendant. Another person was a nurse. I don't know that you're going to catch someone like that. I think having open conversations with people, they might tell you that they have a lot of cats. It might be some of your coworkers and your volunteers, to be honest. So I think having open conversations, and I think letting people know too that there's a resource available. I think that would be my approach, because I don't think you're really going to have obvious signs necessarily.
No, I agree. I don't think, and plus what we do, we don't judge when they come in, please. I don't think you're going to know, but I will tell you that all the hoarding cases I've dealt with, I'm pretty sure there was not a single adopted animal there. There might have been some transferred animals there to rescues on a couple of those hoarding cases, some that transferred out. But as far as adopters go, rescue hoarding and typical hoarding is they're saving a life, but they're typically not paying to save a life, because that life is safe in your shelter. Well, most shelters, and they're viewed that way. That's why we call them shelters. So can't even think of a any way possible to know when they came in. Because even the smell, my grandpa didn't shower but once a year. So, and he despised cats. So I just want to let you know, I just don't think there's any way to know that. So therefore, don't go prejudge folks based on that.
Thank you so much, Mike. And thank you to all of our presenters from this afternoon's session.